Hi, welcome back again to the Ivory Tower Collections. We're going to do something kind of interesting today, I hope. I acquired this 7800 in basically untested condition through a deal on Atari Age. And I thought it might be kind of fun if I video document the process I go through to basically go through and verify functionality on an Atari 7800 such as this one, as well as show you the diagnostics I put it through and things like that, just to see if this thing's in working condition or not, and if not, to see if we can bring it back to life. So that's what we're going to do. Now, basically, to start with, I would always do a physical inspection. Now this console's obviously beat up. You can see there's lots of scratches on the shell of the casing of the console, as well as on the metal strip here. The nameplate strip is pretty worn out. These buttons are also pretty crusty feeling, so especially the reset and the power. So they're probably going to need to be popped out and cleaned out good. Additionally, I'll probably end up having to replace the switches internally. That's just pretty much par for the course. Otherwise, the case condition overall is in pretty good shape. It's not really broken or cracked in any way. So that's good. It still has its rubber feet in place. All the nominal switches that are required seem to be functioning. The main issue with this thing, for sure, is the power. And I don't know if I can be able to get the light on this or not. I may bring it up to the camera. There we go. So apparently the original power jack got broken on this, and this wire was, I assume, soldered in. Not sure. It's been cut since then, so I don't really know what to expect when I crack this thing open to take a look, but obviously that's not gonna work. So that'll need to be checked out. Also, the cartridge port is pretty dirty inside. But the actual connector pins themselves don't look too bad. I do see a little bit of some corrosion in there, so I'll probably end up having to hit that with my good cleaner. Be easier to do that if I just take, once the cover's taken off, if I just take the sleeve off around the cartridge port area. So yeah, before I do anything else, what we'll need to do is go ahead and just take this thing apart and take a look inside of it and see what we find. I've taken all of the screws out, or at least loosened them up, and one thing I noticed right off the bat was that I'm obviously not the first person inside of this. We can tell that based on this taped up electrical doohickey we got here with the wire. That's an official word, doohickey, I'm telling you. But the screws also look to be a little crusty, maybe some water damage, maybe some rust. And the center screw that normally goes down here, and the front bottom center opening here, was the wrong kind. The normal screws that come in the 7800 are about, I don't know, they're just shy of a ½ inch or so. See if my camera will focus on that a little bit. Yep. And they've got a rounded Phillips cross tip end on them. You can use a number 1 or a number 2 Phillips usually to get those off. But the one that was in the center was approximately the right length, but it's not the right threading because it's actually like a wood screw with a countersunk top on it. And yeah, anyway, I guess it works, but it's not the right one. And there's one screw left in here, which I just got loose. Okay. So there's that. Let's take the cover, move those out of the way a little bit. Let's take the cover off and see what we're going to find inside. Well, it's dusty inside, but I don't see anything too horrible. Switches are definitely going to need to be popped out and cleaned. But for now, I'm going to set this top cover to the side. So, when looking at the rest of the board, we've got some pretty decent surfaced rust already taking place on top of this RF shield. It's not really a problem, it's just more of a cosmetic thing. And if I should decide to AV mod this, which I am considering repairing this and AV modding it, perhaps for something cool, I'm not sure, but I may not even need the RF shield anymore, although I typically tend to put the RF shields back in place on almost every console that I do an AV modification for. But anyway, so yeah, that's the next thing we need to do is go ahead and get this RF shielding off so that we can have a better look at what's underneath the RF shield, and then also hopefully be able to more easily remove the main board out of the case. So that's what I'm going to do next. Okay, so to get rid of the RF shield, I've actually got a pretty cool tool I use that helps me do this. Some people just use needle nose pliers, and that's fine, you can do that. But the purpose behind the needle nose pliers and this tool is because if you're not familiar, and I'll see if the camera can pick this up, the RF shielding, it kind of picks up on that a little bit, is held in place with these metal tabs right here that are twisted in these slots all around the 7800. Well, you can use needle nose pliers to kind of grab them and straighten them back out. But I actually use this tool that came in a soldering tool kit that I got for pretty inexpensively at a Fry's Electronics some times back. And I believe the official term for this tool is they call it the forked, F-O-R-K-E-D, forked end. It's basically a shaft with a slot in the middle of it. It's kind of hollowed out. The other end of it's got like a little chip IC lever puller thing on it, which kind of works okay. So I use this because, again, with that slotted end in it, so I kind of got my nail in there a little bit, it makes it real easy to put it around the metal tabs and just twist them straight. Or twist or turn or however terminology you want to use. And so that's what I'm going to do here. Now, with the cover off, I can already tell, the top cover off rather, I can already tell that what was done to this, in looking here, is that somebody had soldered on a couple of wires in place of where the old semi-proprietary connector used to be that was originally on here. So obviously that needs to be looked at and most likely replaced. Now, getting that connector is not going to be fun. There's really not a source for them that I'm aware of, at least not the panel mount solder version of it. So I've got a couple of options available to me, which I'll discuss here in a bit. So yeah, I'm just going to continue to twist off each of these little metal tabs, not twist them off, but to twist them and straighten them out back into place to make it easier to lift this off. So I will be right back. I've now got all the little tabs straightened out and am now going to attempt to try to remove the top RF shield. I did notice that whoever put it back together actually didn't redo one of the tabs on the back by the 7805 voltage regulator's heatsink and the back of the cartridge slot. Not too unusual. If you don't have the tool like I do here, it's almost impossible to get a pair of needle nose pliers in there to try to twist those back into place. A lot of people I've seen, if they've worked on one before, will actually break these tabs off completely because, let's be honest, you've got like a dozen other locations around this. It's not like the cover's going to fall up. So, you know, I can kind of understand that. But again, I try to keep them in place as much as possible. But I will tell you, they are fragile. They are thin, almost aluminum steel alloy combination. Not real sure. Since it rusts up like this, it's obviously steel, but it's fairly thin and malleable. And as such, over time, if you twist these too much or bend them back and forth too much from getting into your console a lot for repairs, the tabs will just break off. So, in fact, my own personal 7800, from all the different modifications that I've tried on it over the years, I think I've only got like maybe half the tabs left intact because the rest just broke off. But anyway, I've got these others separated. So what I'm going to do now, and this is where the little lever end on this tool comes in really handy. Hopefully the camera will focus on that. Is that I can reach in under the board and just kind of give it a light lifting. And again, it's a lever, so I am using it to leverage and try to move this RF shield up and off the board. It looks like the back here is going to be a little bit, or this one side is going to be a little bit trickier. So I just got to get up under it a little bit and twist a little bit more. And come on. Then when I set it down, the cover just kind of pops off. So that's handy enough. Now the underside, or the original inside of the cover, sorry, actually looks pretty good. Still nice and fairly shiny in there. You can see what it used to look like compared to the dull and brown we've got going on up here now. I will set that off to the side. And here we are. The main board of this 7800. And I'll zoom the camera in a little bit so we can get a better look at it. Okay, that's good. Move it into frame a little bit better. Or try to. Okay, well, why can I not? There we go. All right. So it doesn't really look like there's been any work that's been done on this before, to be honest. So that's good, I guess. Aside from the whole issue with the power cord over here, or the power connection over here, that again, there's a couple of wires just soldered to it. Let me move my light over so that shows up a little bit better. See, I've got a couple of just soldered on wires to replace this. So I've got two options for this. One option is that I actually have a spare parts 7800 board that still has the original power connector. Again, I don't know if my camera's going to zoom in on that or not. Hopefully it will. Come on, zoom. Or not. Oh well. Anyway, the connector's right here. So I could just desolder this connector right off and pop it on to this board. And that is probably the route that I will actually take. The other option is that I could use a, I actually have these adapter cables, which basically what it is it's two wires just like this kind of, but thicker, higher quality wires, better gauge, so that they can handle current better. I can attach that, and on the other end of it, and it's about, I guess about 6-8 inches long or so for this cable. But what I could do is I could use it, and the other end of it actually gives me a standard barrel jack connection, like what you would use on a Sega Genesis or an Atari Jaguar, or even you could use a Sega Master System power supply to provide the power you need to power up your 7800. That's another option, but I would prefer to try to keep this thing stock if I can at all possible, at least for now. Again, I am talking about possibly modifying it, but that's in the future. So it looks like I've got some bodge wire repairs here too, probably factory done. That's rather interesting. I will probably go ahead and put the original, or replace that connector. I'll take the connector off the other one, put it on this one, and then at that point we should be able to power this up and at least test it and see if it functions. I don't really see anything else majorly wrong with this that would probably provide any issues. Voltage regulator does look like it's been replaced though. Yeah, in fact the voltage regulator is barely even attached to the heatsink anymore. It's just kind of loose. They used a different screw. That's not even the right kind of screw. Now that I see that, I'm not sure if I can get that to show up on the camera or not, but I'll try. It's kind of wanting to focus. Anyway, that's the wrong kind of screw. It's not the right kind. So I'll need to fix that because the regulator's barely even making contact on the heatsink, to be honest. It's really sitting there loose. And you know what? If I'm going to go that, if I got to go that far, I might as well just replace out the voltage regulator. Why not? I've got some on hand. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go ahead and desolder the old connector off that parts board and replace out the 7805 voltage regulator, and I will be right back. Okay, I'm back. Now, in taking a better look at this voltage regulator deal assembly, it's actually, it was worse than I thought. Once I loosened up the improper screw that they had plugged into this thing, trying to hold it in, which wasn't holding on to anything, by the way, then the heatsink assembly basically just fell off. So yeah, this wasn't even really doing anything. It was just there. Now the reality is this voltage regulator is probably fine, but again, they're not that expensive. They're actually pretty cheap, and I'd like to go ahead and replace it with a higher amperage output version voltage regulator anyway. A lot of 7800s only came with like 750, sometimes only 500 milliamp output voltage regulators. And it's enough to provide for the 7800 what it needs, but the interesting thing is that the original power supply was a 750 milliamp output power supply, so we were already providing more current than a lot of these voltage regulators could handle. Probably just Atari reusing old parts from the 2600 era would be my guess, and from the 5200 and all their other systems. But anyway, so I'll go ahead and take this old one out anyway, just to be on the safe side, and put this new one in it. Again, they're not very expensive. Pretty cheap part really, and it's not that big a deal to do it, and it's really just a good preventative measure. So I'm going to go ahead and do that and get that put in place, and I'm also going to desolder the connector off the spare parts board and put that back in place here as well. So let me get to it. I've made all the needed repairs that I needed to for now, and we basically have this thing in a mode ready to be able to test it up. So just so you can see what I did, the first thing I did was I changed out and replaced the original broken off power connector that just had those wires in it. So that's now been replaced back and soldered back in place where it needed to be, right there. And then the other thing I did was I went ahead and changed out the voltage regulator and put an actual proper screw and nut and washer assembly in there to hold it in place like it's supposed to. Also, I applied some new thermal paste on the back end of it just to be on the safe side. I also resecured the heatsink back in place. So yeah, in my next shot I will power this thing up. I will leave it out of the case like this as we see it, at least just for initial testing purposes, just to see how we're doing, and makes it easier to see if any smoke escapes, you know, the magic smoke. So I've kind of got things ready to go here. There's not going to be a real easy way for me to show the console at the same time that I'm testing it. Maybe I can. I'll see if I can get my little PVM monitor or something hooked up to it to hook up. Except that PVM monitor only has S-video and composite, so I don't have an easy way to do RF, which of course this 7800, that's the only thing it has. So what do I need to test it? Well, obviously I'm now going to need an actual 7800 power supply, so I'll have one connected up and ready to go here. So this is a legit Atari 7800 power supply. And obviously I'm going to need a controller. So I've got one of Dan Waiter's wonderful NES modified controllers here that he sells on his Etsy shop. And I'll put a link to that in the video description if you're interested in them. They're fairly affordable. He sells them both assembled and as unassembled kits, and I think currently all he has is just the unassembled kits. But yeah, so I'm going to get an RF cable hooked up to this thing, which I've got one ready to go on my TV back here, and we'll connect this thing up and see if what we can get. Plugged into there like that. And the first thing I will do is to go ahead and plug in power. This will be the first test for any sparks or anything. So to check this, I'm going to shut this light off for a second. And we'll see if anything bad happens. I'm hoping not. Okay. Now for the next test. Does it turn on? No. I do not appear to have any power on condition. So let's take this back out real quick. And we'll need to check a few things. We'll need to troubleshoot and diagnose further at this point. So good thing, no need to have the TV just yet, so I'll just go ahead and leave this RF disconnected. So in a no power condition situation, what you got to do first is you always ASAP the problem. Because we have no power, we need to start at power. So what does that mean exactly? Well, ASAP means always start at power. So the first thing I'd want to do is to make sure that my power supply is good, and I actually know that this power supply is good. So the next thing we would want to do is to plug it back in again, like I had it. Just like that. And then what we would want to do and need to do from here is to take some voltage measurement readings. So I'm going to get my multimeter ready and make sure it is in DC mode. So I'll just set that down right over here for now. It's fine. Won't really be able to see the display, but I don't know, maybe I can set it up and we can prop it up so it can be visible. There we go. Sort of, kind of, maybe? Well, we'll go with that. Okay, so we need to check some basic voltages. Now, the main voltage that I would want to see is if I am even getting power where I need to from the connector. So the easiest way I will do that, and I'll see if I can zoom the camera down in on that. I may not be able to, but I will try. That's probably about as close as I'm going to be able to get it. Okay, so what I'm going to do is with the probes, I'm going to attach, or I'll set one probe to ground along the ground rail that's all along the shielding here. So I'll just set one like right there. And then the other end, I will go over here and apply it to one of these pin ends and see and check if I've got any voltage coming across. And I may not have any. Oh, there we go. We're reading about 13.4 volts. Again, you probably can't see that in the camera, but that's what I'm getting. So we definitely have voltage going into the connector. Next thing we want to do is to see if we have voltage getting to the power regulator, or the voltage regulator. And the same basic rules apply in that I'm going to check a ground point on one side by just holding the probe to ground, and then I'm going to take the other end of the probe and attach it to, let's see if I can get my meter to kind of, see if I block the light. Maybe it'll show up better if I Oh yeah, look at that. Okay. So do this and attach the other end to the end of the voltage regulator, output, and we've got nothing, it would appear. Nothing at all. So, appears to be a dead 7800 still. Now, the thing with the 7800 is there's not a whole lot to, I guess you could say, to really go wrong with it. As far as the power is concerned. Let me get my meter out of the way for a second. Turn my light back on. So there are a couple of parts, and I've ran into this once before and actually managed to bring one back to life. So one thing that could be bad is this MJ201 transistor right here. I've had one where this was blown and wasn't switching the way it was supposed to be. The other possibility is that we could have a bad component up here somewhere. There's like a couple of capacitors. There's at least one capacitor here, and I've seen that go bad before. We've also got a diode that sits over here, and another capacitor that sits back over here and here. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe this logic chip here can also be to blame, and possibly these two transistors. So there are a couple of things obviously to look at. It's just a matter of figuring it out. It can also be just a bad power switch. That's another possibility. So in order to isolate all of those types of things, one thing we can do to at least check the power switch theory is essentially to short it on the bottom. Basically make that connectivity happen that the power switch normally would normally take place. So that's obviously one thing we can do. The other thing would be to just try changing out some different components. So I guess I'll keep checking and looking at a few things and be back with my results. Well, that was actually a lot easier than I thought. Yes, I know. This has actually been a really good work for me here. So I'm going to move this over in a way that you'll be able to see. Now, I want you to kind of orientate yourself to understand what we're looking at here. So this is actually joystick player 1's controller port, and this is player 2's controller port. I have the 7800 main board turned upside down. Now, so the thing here is that right here is the power LED, right down here at the bottom. And one of the things that I wanted to do was just to make sure it wasn't a bad power switch, because the switches do go bad in these things pretty easily, is to simply short two of the contact pins that would initiate a power on condition. So the easiest way to do that, probably not the safest, but the easiest way to do that is just to use a screwdriver, for instance, like the one in my hand. So watch what happens when I cross and short out the contact points at the bottom of the board. There we go. That, ladies and gentlemen, is a lit up power light. So the 7800 circuitry is good to go. The problem is this power switch basically sucks and I need to get it changed out. So that's going to be the next thing I do. Now, in the case of the 7800, I usually tend to go ahead and replace all of the switches. Obviously, they don't really wear out because of use. That's not the problem with these switches. The problem with these switches is that dirt and grime can get trapped underneath them, and when that happens, they just don't work very good at all at that point. So yeah. So yeah, I'll turn my light back off here and you'll be able to clearly see that we have a power light. So yeah, the switches, just dirt and grime can get kind of trapped in underneath them, and when that happens, they just don't work anymore. And you can see I am pushing down on this switch and I've got nothing at all. But if I short it at the bottom, there we go. Actually, I don't have to do that. I can just short it at the top right here next to it. Probably. Maybe not. I guess it's easier to do it from down here. There we go. So, yeah, I'm going to change out the switches and we will be right back. So, as you can see, and as I already mentioned before, the power switches are bad, or at least this power switch is bad, and I need to go ahead and replace it. I'm going to go ahead and replace all 4 sets of front panel switches. just to be on the safe side. It doesn't really take that long to do, as you will see, and I've got them here. So first, let's talk about the switches themselves. You can actually get an almost exact replacement of these from Console 5. So Luke at Console 5 does sell these replacement switches. They're only about $1 a piece or so. And these are exactly that. They are exact replacements. And these are really good. I've used these in numerous repairs. But for some customers, or in my particular case on my equipment or my consoles, if I really want to bulletproof them for a good long while, I have another switch I use too. And that's this one right here, which I know you can't really see it here, but it's actually made by the company Alps. And this is like an industrial premium grade switch. These cost basically twice as much, but they're rated for far more clicks. And the other thing I really like about them is the original switches have a sealed bottom. And I don't know if I'll be able to show that or not on the camera. I'll see if I can get it to focus in or not. Probably won't. So if I can get it to focus in my hand. There we go. So the original switches have like a sealed bottom, and that's fine. It's not a problem. Even these replacements have that. But these Alp switches that I use have actually got, let me see if I can get it to show up here. Focus. There we go. So the Alp switches actually have a hole in the bottom center of them. It's like a weep hole, I guess you could say, to allow moisture and such either to get in, I suppose it could be argued, or to get out. The other thing that's important is that the contact points inside of these Alp switches are in fact silver, not tin or aluminum. Now, Luke has told me at Console 5 that his replacement switches also contain a silver contact point. So again, either of these would be good. Now, since I want this to kind of be stock for the time being, I'm going to go ahead and put in 4 of the brand new Console 5 replacement switches. And so yeah, I'm going to knock that out right now. Now, if you're wondering, I always add a little bit of solder to something that I'm going to desolder. Number one, it just kind of mixes up things a little bit, makes it easier to remove them for sure. So here we go. Time to get these switches out of here. Every single one. No mercy. Alright, well, that one's obviously done. There we go. Perfect. Now we just got to put in the replacements. Okay, very carefully lift the board over. There we go. Four brand new replacement switches. So, should be good. Now we'll plug it back in. See if I get power. Not sure if you can see that. Good to go. Okay, so I'm going to set the video back up again, and this time I will have the TV showing and show you how I diagnose it. Just because we have power doesn't mean that this 7800 is actually ready to rock and roll, obviously. There could be other issues, you know. It does have multiple IC chips that it has contained on its board here, you know. So there could be other problems that we don't know about, because until you have power to it, you don't have any way of knowing. So be right back. And we're back and ready to actually test this 7800 now. One more tool I'm going to need in order to test this thing further is my Mateos 1601 flash memory cartridge that I have for the Atari 7800. That's because I've got the Atari 7800 Diagnostics. I believe it's TEP 392's Diagnostics that he built for color, but also checks controllers, RAM, lots of other things. I've got it loaded into slot bank number 4 on this cartridge here. So I'm going to pop this in and we'll see what we get. Oh, it would help if I put my television to the right input, which in this case is for RF. There we go. And there we are. We do have something. Looks really bad though. Looks like typical crap RF. Not sure I can really improve that much. Largely has to do with the cables. That's probably about the best I'm going to be able to get. That's pretty rough looking, but it is at least visible and we have a picture. That is the important part. So the next thing I need to do is to get my controller plugged into this thing so I can actually manipulate it. I also need some volume. Oh yeah, that's pretty scratchy. You probably can't hear it over the camera and over my microphone, but trust me, it does not sound as pretty as I would like. And I had a controller. Ah, here we are. Okay, so I'm going to turn it off again real quick. Get this controller plugged into it. I don't typically like to plug controllers into a console when it's on. One of the interesting things about the ColecoVision and about the Atari 5200 is that their controller ports, the IC and multiplexer controllers for them, can get blown up real easily and they have to be replaced often. That's because of static electricity from your body from plugging the controller in while it was probably powered on, which is not a good thing. So let's turn this back on now that I've got a controller in it. And here we are. I do have audio. Let me turn that back up again. Like I said, it's very staticky. Am I on the right channel? Yep, definitely on the right channel. Huh, looks like we lost it. Ooh, okay, so what we have here is a pretty crummy RF box connection that's causing a large part of that. Anyway, it is what it is. Okay, so first thing to do is to do an internal RAM test. And it looks like all of that has passed. And I don't have any external RAM on it. Let's check out the audio test. Now this will test both the TIA 2 channels as well as all 4 channels of the Pokey chip that I have installed on my Mateos 1601 cart. Okay, that tested just fine. Do a quick cartridge integrity test, although I don't usually have any issues with my flash cartridge. It's standard NTSC, pretty basic stuff. So now comes the real test, as I call it, and this is the joystick test. Now it says joystick test, but it actually also is good for checking all of the switches. So let me go ahead and select this. And just like it implies, I can take the joystick and move it around in all 4 cardinal directions, so that works good. Fire 1, Fire 2 are good to go. I can also use it to check all the other switches that I replaced. So there's switch B over there, changing. That's actually the black and white switch. Here is the game select switch. And we do see it right here. It's lighting up the word select. It also lights up a couple of other values as well. And then we have the reset switch, and that is also working properly. So all the switches should be good to rock and roll. Actually, that black and white switch may be a little flaky. I'm really having to push down hard on it for it to take effect. I may have to change that one back out. The other switches we can check are the difficulty switches. So there's player 1. Again, it shows switching over there. And player 2's difficulty switch. And that switch also works properly. So all of the switches seem to be functional. The other thing to check is joystick controller port number 2. And I am going to plug in a second controller for that. And I know I just said a second ago you should never plug controllers in with a console hot, and that is absolutely correct. So just pretend that this controller I am plugging in already existed, because it did. Alright, so same thing here, checking all 4 cardinal directions, that's good. Player 1, player 2's fire buttons are good. This one's good, so all of the fire buttons good, all of the cardinal directions are good. So that's good, excellent. That should pretty much mean that this 7800 is fully functional and ready to go. Now to test that, I will switch over to, let's try putting it to a game. So let me switch my Mateos over to another position here. Turn it on and see what we've got. Got Dungeon Stalker here. But RF is really rough, isn't it? I can't even barely see the enemy shots. Yeah, this is pretty rough. Yeah, I found a little point creator over there. You can just, from that particular spot, the monster always spawns. So if you can shoot him in that little corridor, you'll pretty much have him regenerate each time, and you can just time it perfectly to keep taking him out. See, now he'll show up back up over here again. He'll automatically come towards me. Oh, he got me. All right, so Dungeon Stalker obviously works. The other thing to do is to try something perhaps with some Pokey audio. This is Tep's excellent Donkey Kong Arcade PKXM edition. He provided me the ROM, so I could test this out on my Mateos, and that's with Pokey audio. Alright, well, I'd say this 7800's pretty much good to go, other than the crummy RF, but that's nothing surprising. So definitely a good candidate for a UAV mod, I should think. So maybe I'll do that in a separate video. Maybe I'll UAV mod this thing, and we'll go from there. Of course, I got to get some UAV mod boards first, but yeah, the 7800 is good. I'll move the camera down here a little bit. Oh, whoa, I'm a scary looking dude. Sorry about that. So yeah, I've been really pleased with how this came out, and hopefully you guys learned a little bit of something as far as my little troubleshooting skills here. I'll be honest, 7800 is it's a fairly easy beast to troubleshoot for the most part. Again, there's only a few components that can go bad on it when one doesn't power up. And in most cases, like you saw here, it ended up just being a switch that needed to be replaced on the front panel as far as getting power restored. But I also had to replace the power connector as well, because of course the one that was on it was, well, it was non-existent, wasn't it? So yeah, plus we've got a replacement voltage regulator. The original voltage regulator is probably fine, but again, that's a cheap part to replace out. And since it obviously had been worked on before and it wasn't attached properly, it was a good thing to just go ahead and change it out, put a higher quality replacement in there, and put some new thermal paste in place and call it good. So yeah, thanks for hanging out with me today.